I'm 18 or 19.
All right, it's live.
Two more about that.
Good afternoon and welcome to the House Progressive Caucus. It is Tuesday, April 1st, and today we're going to be talking, getting an update on education policy and funding. And we have a few guests with us from Friends of
Vermont Public Education.
Friends of Vermont Education.
And I should say I also represent the Burlington School District.
Right. Yeah. And Representative Teddy Wozniak from Ways and Means. I also have some notes that were sent over to us from an ed committee member that I'd be happy to share. Representative Wozniak has a short time that he can spend with us. So I think we'll try to move into questions around the funding piece as quickly as we possibly can before we get into the ed policy pieces.
Great.
And so why don't we actually start there? What are the ed funding questions that are on the table this year, and how close? I mean, I think you have to pass a bill out for your portion of the bill. Oh, thank you. And pretty shortly.
Yes.
So yeah, what are the questions that you're being asked to answer in your part of the bill?
Yes. So we were just referred to Ways and Means H 454, which is the big education bill that has been working on all session. And so there are 4 buckets of work that Ways and Means is looking at in terms of education spending. One, what is the formula that we are going to use? You know, right now we have the very complicated formula with CLAs and weights and all of these other things, and we'll be moving towards some version of a foundation formula. The second bucket of work is how we do property tax assessments throughout the state. Right now, it's pretty much every town fends for themselves in terms of assessments. We're going to be proposing moving towards a regionalized regional assessment districts, which are largely, the proposal is largely based on county, with the exception of Essex Orleans and Franklin Grand Isle combined together, and giving PPR a bit more authority and power to determine how and how often those assessments are done. The third bucket of work is around the property tax credit. Right now, we have a lag in our system where based on your income, you get a certain tax credit on your property tax bill, but it's delayed a year. So the property tax credit you earn this year is applied to next year's bill. The governor proposed, and we've made amendments to a homestead exemption as opposed to a property tax credit, which would allow, based on your income and house value, you to deduct a certain amount of your house value for purposes of taxation. And then, of course, in the foundation formula, all the really important questions are, you know, what's the base amount going to be? What is included in that base amount? There are also bigger questions that we have to tackle around special education funding and transportation funding. But those are the big pieces that we're looking at. There's one more thing that I'm missing.
And people weights.
Yes, and the weights are being, talked about as part of the foundation formula, and we've been hearing a lot of testimony from Dr. Tammy Colby about suggestions for how we build the base amount in the foundation formula, and then also what the weights look like beyond that. And our goal is to, Chair Kornheiser spoke at the Caucus of the Whole last year, talking about how important it is that policy changes, governance changes, and finance changes, funding changes are all moving on within the same time frame, because we know we can't change policy without changing funding, and if you're not changing governance, you really should be changing policy and funding. So our work will be to receive the bill. We got to walk through on Monday. We had a Zoom committee meeting, which was live streamed. That Ledge Council and Chair Conlon from the Education Committee walked us through the policy work that they did. So now over the course of this week, we'll be incorporating a lot of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of months.
So affirmative decisions are being made on the foundation formula. And how quickly are those anticipated to implement?
There's if I'm remembering correctly, and please fact check me on what's actually in we have, for purposes of starting this work, we had drafted a committee bill. My understanding is that the work in that committee bill will be absorbed into H 454. But implementation between the years 27 to 30, depending on what piece we're talking about. So the governor proposed moving to 5 regional school districts, each with their own elected school board. He had proposed electing those school boards during the 2026 elections. I know that what came from House Education proposes to elect those folks in the 2028 election to give more of a, transition time. So so the goal is full implementation of most of this stuff by 2030 has been drafted, and depending on what piece you're talking about, they have different implementation dates, but there is a committee bill on our website that has some of that. Oh, I remember property tax classifications.
Oh, right.
Taxing second homes. That's the mini viral moment. We have a proposal right now we do have homestead and non-homestead property tax rates. So we have apartment buildings, small businesses, industrial sites, etc. Anything that's not a homestead is being taxed at the same rate. And in my view, that's just not equitable and doesn't make any sense. So we are proposing having 9 different classifications of non-homestead property taxes. And that includes, second homes over $1 million, under $1 million, apartment buildings, affordable housing, commercial, industrial, undeveloped land, public use. There's 1 or 2 more in there. And the idea is to start this year with just getting those classifications down in law and looking at our statewide grand list and assigning all of our properties to those different classifications, so that as we're going through this transition, we know we can't do everything all at once. Next year, come back and have a better look at what tax rates might be best for each of those categories, so that we could, for example, tax second homes at a higher rate and tax affordable housing developments at a lower rate to incentivize the creation of affordable housing, as one example.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I'd love to hear from you all on everything that
So
you just walked through.
I think just to tie into that, it makes sense for me to give a little bit more of the Burlington School District perspective and then talk about if that works for you. Because I think it's really important in terms of what Teddy's committee, the Ways and Means Committee is doing now to districts like Burlington, which is by no means the only district that cares about this. Every district does, but that kind of loosely affiliated Coalition for Vermont Student Equity worked really hard to get Act 127 put into place, which was updating the pupil weights to actually account for real need based on Dr. Colby and Dr. Bruce Baker's 2019 pupil weighting report. So it is really critical to districts like Burlington that hard fought for equity is not lost when this is done. They are absolutely not opposed, on its face to a foundation formula. It just depends what is the math that's underlying. How do we do the excess spend, et cetera? How do we account for student need? So I think right now that we're pretty, happy about the direction the committee's going in. Dr. Tammy Colby is phenomenal. And I think her being a part of this process is incredibly important from our perspective. We have, I will say, put it mildly, strong concerns over the Dr. Larry Pikus report that the administration has leaned on a lot. That is something that we're really nervous about. It absolutely guts the poverty weight, and that would be incredibly problematic. And it seems like your committee realizes that. I think it's important to see modeling too of everything and just to understand what the impacts are before decisions are made. Now, the Friends of Vermont Public Education side, what we're really focused on is just creating even playing field for private schools, independent schools, and public schools. And this means if a policy is good enough to be implemented, and if it's necessary in a public setting, then it should be implemented in independent school setting. And if it's not a good policy for some reason, then let's look at that and then take it back. I think there's a couple things. So our group did get asked to go in last week and testify in the House Education Committee. That is what our focus is. There's just a couple things. If there's Nick Sherrick, my colleague here, we take this side by side together that will show you. And I think it's stark. It's what the private schools have to do, or what the public schools have to do that the private schools don't. So if you just pull a couple examples off of that to share.
Yeah, and this is specific to private schools that are receiving public dollars.
Right.
They should be held to the same standards. So governance is different. currently, but there's all sorts of things around financial transparency, right? Parents, schools don't disclose their finances. There's issues around disciplinary procedures, right? So
Teacher licensure is a big one.
there is another big one. Basic admission, right? You know, picking and choosing kids versus taking anyone who comes.
Right, and kicking them out, for not, not good cause, pretty much. So these are things that are, incredibly concerning. In terms of the proposal that House Education has put out, I think most people in the public education space are pretty pleased with the direction it's going. The House Education Committee, instead of just creating lines, which seem a little bit arbitrary in the governor's proposal, this is actually imagining that the commission will take a bigger role in creating this. So they're putting together a subcommittee that's going to be focusing on creating this. And we support that because it's anytime you're taking your time and, using more data, that's a good thing. We're very concerned within the Senate, the Baumgart's proposal. It clearly carves out the historic four academies. It seems like the entire proposal is built around that. So we will be working really hard to make sure that they're kind of thoughtful approach. The H 454 actually lays out a timeline that sees new governance taking over, I think, in 2029. So it does give a map. It just doesn't actually have a timeline, but not a map. And we support that. There was also, I think, a really interesting part of this was the discussion around the State Board of Education and who has appointment authority last week. It became, full day constitutional course with Ledge Council. So I should take a step back. The committee wanted to, they were looking at taking a proposal that Kate McCann from Montpelier, Representative McCann, had put in that would have taken the majority appointment power away from the governor and given it to education groups. So NEA would have put somebody on, the Superintendent's Association would have put somebody on, and then the Speaker in the Senate Committee on Committees would put someone on. They were told by their legal counsel that she really thought that it passed the constitutional test, but that it wasn't their job to figure out if it would. That's the judiciary's job. And then Jay Johnson from the governor's office came in and said this frustrates the governor's ability to execute the law. But in the end of the day, they decided not to do it. They did add somebody so that the Speaker and the Senate do now each have appointments, but it's not majority. And the reason they did that was just because they knew the governor would veto the bill. It wasn't really a constitutional decision. We would have liked to see the state board either expanded more or given more. We would have liked to see the people that are actually working on the ground, the NEA, the superintendent having more voice in that room. That's just not going to happen right now. And that's kind of a proxy for the private versus public school, right? There's a lot of, that's the body that, approves independent schools or doesn't approve independent schools. And so the makeup matters a lot.
Great. We'll come back to some questions around that. Just to follow up a bit more on the Ways and Means side of things, because I know you need to leave immediately. What do you expect? Where do you expect to land with pupil weighting?
We're supposed to hear again from Dr. Tammy Colby on, I believe, Thursday. She's on our agenda this week. I promise Thursday. So, I think that our committee writ large had a similar reaction. We took a lot of testimony from Dr. Caucus as well as Dr. Colby, and I think that broadly speaking, our vision for the weights is more aligned with Dr. Colby's than Dr. Caucus's. But all of that, the weights don't actually matter, frankly, until we decide what that base amount of the foundation formula is to be. And so a lot of our work this week, starting later this afternoon, is going to be diving into what is included in that base amount. So first we decide what's included in the base amount, and then there's the question of what those things cost. You aggregate that together and that gets you your base, and then you'll apply the weights. So that'll be a lot of the work over the course of this week. We'll be figuring out what number that base amount is going to be.
Which is quite different between the two of them, right? His is like 13,200 and hers is 15,500.
I don't want the number. I think you're in the right ballpark. I just don't remember, so I don't want to say it. But yes, but similar alignment with how the weights are used and what types of weights, meaning ESL, economically disadvantaged, sparsity weights, especially as we look forward to going towards larger school districts, is all on the table. And we welcome all input.
Great. Do you expect Dr. Colby will be proposing like specific numerical weights, or
I have not received any information on what she's going to. We had her in last week and she was talking a bit about the different ways one could approach a
Yeah.
base
Yeah.
formula. So I expect her to offer some ballparks on weights, but I haven't received materials from her. We haven't received her
Yeah,
materials
yeah.
for Thursday,
For
yet,
this
so I don't
week,
want
right.
to.
Okay. Yeah, just
I
curious.
don't want to say something she doesn't actually do.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you
Right for
for
blood
joining us.
cells.
Yeah, good luck with the Senate.
Retweet.
Okay, so I thought, now that we've, lost our Ways and Means member, I could just walk through Kate McCann's, Representative McCann's notes for us, just to, I'll start by saying, obviously, we're not moving to a 5 districts this year.
Right.
Which has not received a good political reception from the governor so far. And the solution instead, which I do think has multi-party support, based on conversations that I've been having with my colleagues who are Republicans, is that we need a little bit more time to determine what size the school districts would be. So there will be, but they did some amendments to the section of session law on the Commission on the Future of Public Education, to come back next year with different proposals.
3, I think, yeah.
Right. And then the subcommittee, I actually wasn't tracking exactly what you said before. The subcommittee that is going to be making these determinations, is that the group you were talking about where they have that conversation around?
They created like the former superintendents and,
Right.
former business managers.
And then, so they've named 5 former superintendents and school district business managers. And the governor gets to appoint 3, and then 1 will be appointed by the speaker and 1 will be appointed by the Senate. Is that how you're understanding it?
I'll have to honestly, that I don't want to give you the wrong answer, so I'll have to
Okay.
dig into that.
Okay, I'm just curious about that. So, and then the other requirements, and this is something that we've spent a lot of time talking about outside of the committee. What are the different criteria that should be brought into consideration for the creation of the school district? So school districts are going to have a minimum of 4,000 students. They are, let's see, what are the other requirements here? I'm just kind of trying
And I know
to.
from Burlington School District's perspective, that number relatively makes sense,
Yeah,
yeah, and that's how you would kind of do it, is start with a number and then take it from there.
yeah. And how many students are in the Burlington School
Oh,
District?
gosh, I'll have to ask. I don't know off the top of my head.
Because it seemed likely that we, for example, using this proposal, may end up with a school district that includes Burlington.
Right, I think that's very possible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or and potentially Winooski.
right.
But so for larger school districts right now, we might not see much change.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. That's possible.
Okay,
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's an email flying back and forth, that the governor's plan, it had Winooski and Burlington separated in 5 districts. I don't know if that's. Yeah. Oh, in the Bongards map, right, that's what it was.
oh, the Bongards map. Yeah, and this is not, the Bongards proposal is not something that we know much about, so I do want to try to wrap up here in several minutes, but I would like to hear a little bit more about that. But yeah, other things, gonna make sure we have a good school construction program. We're setting average minimum class sizes.
And private schools have to do that as well,
Right.
which we obviously support. Yeah, that's the whole.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, right. And it did seem, I did read the actual committee bill. It did seem like there was one strange line in that list of types of schools that would have to comply with public standards, or to which we could grant public money so long as, and there was,
They're
pretty
schools? Was it the therapeutic school carve out?
Well, no, it seemed like there was a line that just said or independent schools after defining the criteria for independent schools above.
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll have to take a closer
Yeah,
look
me
at that.
too.
It just seemed like they had a section on independent schools that made it
Interesting.
very clear about the standards that independent schools would have to meet in order to qualify to receive public money.
it's like 51%, that's in the bill. They have
Right, 51%
publicly funded,
publicly funded.
or they can decide to meet the education quality standards.
Right. Okay, I think
That may have been.
that was it. Yeah,
That's how they can get
so,
out of like the class size, but yeah.
okay. And education quality standards are going to be implemented by,
Well, they're already, the State Board of Education already, and I think there's already a process where an independent school can meet the EQS. I believe that there is one or two that already do. It's a process you have to go through, and it includes, it's curricular. I think that's where they would end up putting the class sizes as well. So it was a little confusing to me
Interesting.
that would be a way to not meet the class sizes, if that is part of, if it's in the EQS, but that part is also a little confusing to me, where it actually intersects with the State Board of Education's role.
right. And so then there isn't any conversation right now about updating the EQS.
Well, not specifically about updating the EQS. There is language in there to update the 2200 rules series, but that's, I think, those are the rules that actually govern, independent schools. And independent schools that meet standards to be publicly funded. But I think it's pretty basic. It's just like telling the State Board of Education to update them to be inclusive of these new requirements, I believe. The EQS, not that I am aware of, and not that I remember reading in that bill.
Okay. And then there are a number of other systems that have to be in place before we can do any implementation, like statewide graduation requirements, putting a statewide school calendar in place.
Which that one is not, to be clear, there's no opposition of Burlington School District. I do know there's just the concern because Burlington School District is such a diverse, staying with newsfeed, like it's a very diverse district and there are a lot of holidays that are taken off. And I think that's just a kind of concern that they've raised. Yeah.
That's a helpful thing to find.
Yeah.
And that's by 2028, 2029 school year, so we have a bit of time.
Yeah.
And then a couple of minutes, if you could just give us a heads up on what to expect coming from the Senate.
Yes, so Longard's proposal, right now, I actually don't think this is going to be the final version out of Senate Education, but he's really pushing for this map that he created. It is 9, it divides the districts into 9. I think it's very striking. It's been pointed out to me by people who understand this much deeper level than I do, that it carves out some of the poorest areas in the South away from Burton, which I think is interesting. And also protects the way that the way that his plan is written, protects the historic 4 academies. So I think technically you could say that it probably does actually cut down on tuition and going to independent schools, but it's certainly it creates a buffer around the 4 academies.
But you couldn't explain exactly how it does create that buffer.
What are the rules that he's put out with? I think it's also a percentage, like maybe 51%.
I think he's using a 50% number. I mean, in a lot of ways, around the Vermont Public Education, the group we're working with exists sort of philosophically right at the crux of the differences between how the House is approaching this and the Senate is approaching this. And sort of the organizing principle that our found and all I got excited about is like, we shouldn't be letting our public dollars go to private schools. They're allowed to discriminate, right? So we those kids with special needs, queer kids, things like that. And it's not, okay. Not saying that any of the 4 academies are doing that specifically, but like we're very concerned about creating a system where that can't happen. The way the initial Vanguard's map is drawn, it's pretty clear. I don't know if gerrymandering is the right word, it's drawn intentionally to keep these existing institutions, private schools, still getting public dollars. And
because it's choice districts too, right? So it's carving it out so that people can choose to go to that and then taking choice away from places that don't already have it essentially.
yeah, so I mean, if you look at the map with that in mind, I get why it moves here and there.
Did he have any explicit criteria or logic outside? Like, has he laid out, or I can look into it, but I'm curious, like, how he's rationalizing this beyond.
Yeah, he'll make a series of arguments, I think.
Compromise is one of them between the governor's plan.
Yeah, he made a comment about, respecting the sanctity of the mountain ranges, which was precious, because stop what's going on.
But Keisha also pointed out that you'd have to, in one, like any district, drive like 300 miles if you were, like, I think, if you were in the administration in this district. So, and also Senator Ron still has been like a fierce advocate for the public education focused on that committee. So to be clear, just politically though, that I don't think that it's going to be really interesting to see what the Senate and the House end up with. It's clear that it's going to go to conference committee. There's nothing in statute that is mandating them to act this year. I mean, it could blow up. I've seen it happen specifically with the Senate and House Education Conference Committees before, and it could walk away and they could have nothing. That's very possible. But I think everyone is actually making a good faith effort to get something done. It's just and then also this is a year where you have the governor, at least the governor's ghost in the conference committee with you because they have to, there's no more veto happening. So they're going to have to negotiate with him. And where is that compromise actually?
Right.
I don't see it at this moment. But we really support the House. The House's work and are going to be making a big push to make sure that we get as close to that as possible with the Senate.
Great. Thank you. And you'll keep Burlington representative aware of what's happening in Ways and Means.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. Any other questions? Brian, any questions? Sounds like none. Okay, we're gonna wrap caucus for the day. I do have announcements.
Thanks for having us.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Big week.
Sure, and good luck, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so just gonna close out with announcements. So we're back to a normal schedule this week. Reminder that there's craft day at 4 p.m. Tomorrow, we're having a first time event called the State of the Guard. And then there will be a reception afterwards in the Cedar Creek room. So that starts at 5 p.m. There will be a presentation by the Vermont National Guard and then a reception following. Thursday at 4 p.m. we'll be discussing a resolution from the House Rules Committee that will change the way that the House Rules Committee report is done to align with the way that it's done by the Secretary of State. And everyone's been asked to take a look at this House Rules resolution. So I'll try to track that down and send that out to folks so we can review that before Thursday. And then just the update on the education bill. It's going to Ways and Means today. They're actually getting it sooner than Representative Wozniak seems to be aware. They're supposed to be voting it out by tomorrow. That's what I heard. Sounds like he was thinking that they were taking testimony until Thursday.
That's what's on the agenda.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. Appropriations is supposed to get the bill Thursday voted out immediately. Yeah. And we're supposed to be starting to debate on the floor by Thursday. That's what I was told. However, Chair Kornheiser is sick. And so is out right now and unable to chair the committee. So we're not sure if that's going to have an impact on the committee schedules this week. Those are all the announcements that I had for today. And we were just wrapping up for the day, but so why don't we end with introductions to the folks that joined us from the Winooski School District. I'm Rep. Kate Logan. I use she, her, they pronouns. I represent Burlington, the Old North End in downtown Burlington. And that's the Chittenden 16 district. And I serve on the House Committee on Environment. And you've met Representative Tomlinson.
Chloe Tomlinson, she, her, Lucy, and I'm on the Transportation Committee.
We also have Representative Brian Chena joining us remotely.
Yeah, I'm Representative Brian Chena from Burlington, Chittenden 17. I represent part of the Old North End and the East District right up to the Winooski River. So when you're in downtown Winooski, you're looking across the river at the district I represent. And I'm on the House Healthcare Committee. And thanks for joining us today.
Hi, I'm Candy Schneider. I'm a teacher at Winooski High School. Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a senior at Winooski. I am a major in Winooski High School.
I'm Beto and I'm a senior.
Okay. I'm Courtney and I'm with the House of Arts Councils.
I'm Binti and I'm a senior at Winooski High School.
Josh, I'm the Progressive Party Director and staff support for the Post Caucus.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. Today we had a conversation about education policy. Some big decisions are being made by the House of Representatives on changes that we're going to make to our school system that we hope to have implemented by 2030. So for, I think, all of you, you'll be out of high school by the time we're implementing most of the decisions that are being made this week. But if you have any questions, of course, feel free to pass them through to us and we'll get answers back to you. And the big decisions have already been made by the House Education Committee on, how are we going to decide how many school districts we have in Vermont, and a number of other questions. And this week, the financial committees are making decisions about, how much every school district is going to get per student, and a number of other factors about how to weight that amount per student based on other factors, like whether or not their English is their second language, or other needs that student might have, like living way out in the middle of nowhere, for example, far away from their school district. So that's what we talked about today. Sorry you didn't get to listen to that, but I just gave you the very short Cliff's Notes version, and I'm glad you're here today. Thanks for joining us here in the State House. Thanks for joining our caucus. And that's it. We're done with Progressive Caucus for the day.